Hi, everyone. Welcome in. We're going to take a minute or two to welcome everyone and get settled for an exciting evening together. We have had great pleasure looking at all of the comments for where everyone is from. And if you are just joining, we would love for you to use the comments feature to share where you are joining from. We have a lot of representation from Australia this evening. We have Maine here and Seattle, Washington, D.C., Western Massachusetts. Welcome, everyone.
Canada. Yeah, Canada, North Carolina. Lots of North Carolinians.
Very good. Yeah, lots of representation from North Carolina. Wonderful. Welcome in. Very good. And more Massachusetts. Hello. We have a great crowd for this evening to listen to a wonderful talk by Brenda Cox, Skokie, Illinois, and New Zealand.
Nice.
Very good.
What time of day is it in New Zealand, Australia? Must be a good time.
1 p.m. in Sydney, I want to say.
Wow.
Not sure about New Zealand.
Yeah.
You can tell us.
Yeah. Edmonton. Very good. We hope the week is treating everyone well.
Oh, there's one of our upcoming speakers, Catherine Collar.
Yes, that's right. She'll be joining us in the series in just a short while, a couple weeks.
11 a.m. in Tasmania, 1 p.m. in New Zealand.
There
11 a.m.
All right.
Thank you. So a good time.
Tomorrow. They're time
thank you
travelers.
Thank you for joining us. Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Eric Bontempo, and I'm joined tonight by my fellow co-hosts, Inga Brody and Brecken Wood. Our technical director for this episode is Maisie Ferguson. She's an English major and music minor from the University of Kansas. Since 2019, Jane Austen and Company has aimed to provide top-notch programming related to Jane Austen. We've organized 8 different series on topics ranging from race in the Regency to Austen and the Brontes to the many flavors of Jane Austen. And our most recent series that we did in 2025 was Music in the Regency. We are proud to present all of our episodes freely and make sure they're freely available to the public. And you can access them on our website, janeaustenandco.org.
And today we begin our 9th series, Jane Austen's Unsung Characters, because we want to follow our 2025 series that was all about music in the Regency. So we're devoting 2026 to exploring these unsung characters. We know all the major players in Austen's 6 published novels: Elizabeth Bennet, Darcy, Anne Elliot, Emma Woodhouse, Edward Ferrars, and so forth. But Austen's secondary characters are richly portrayed in her published and unpublished works. Miss Bates in Emma, Admiral Croft in Persuasion, Emma Watson in The Watsons. Throughout 2026, you can expect a range of episodes presented by world-class Austen experts and scholars.
As we plan this series, we want your input. We invite you to sing the praises of your favorite minor character by filling out this form. We'd love to hear from you and maybe interview you or feature your response in a future episode. We've already circulated this form in an email, and we've received a lot of delightful responses.
We received one response that called Mrs. Jennings the real mover and shaker of Sense and Sensibility.
And another response sung the praises of Sophia Croft in Persuasion, calling her a truly modern woman in an egalitarian marriage.
And there was a lovely response about Harriet Smith in Emma. She said that Harriet Smith is frequently dismissed as Emma Woodhouse's mousy little sidekick, existing solely to do Emma's bidding and agree with her opinions. I believe that Harriet has more depth, moral fortitude, and backbone than most Austen fans and Austen adaptations give her credit for. So you can scan the QR code or click the link that Maisie is adding to the chat. Who do you want to learn more about in this series?
And now to introduce tonight's speaker, who's kicking things off for us. Brenda S. Cox is the author of Fashionable Goodness, Christianity in Jane Austen's England. She spent almost 10 years researching her own questions about Austen and the church and organizing the information she discovered in her book, making it clear and easy to understand. Fashionable Goodness explores connections between Austen's work, Austen's Church of England, and prominent events and people in English Christianity at the time. Brenda also writes for Jane Austen's World and her own blog, Faith, Science, Joy, and Jane Austen, and the magazine Jane Austen's Regency World. She has spoken on Jane Austen and the Church to Austen groups around the world, in Canada, England, Australia, New Zealand, and various parts of the US.
And before Brenda begins, I'm going to turn things over to our technical director, Maisie, who will explain how you can send in questions during and after Brenda's talk.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to YouTube, our streaming platform. If you would like to leave a comment or ask a question, please use the comment feature on the sidebar. We'll collect your comments throughout the talk, and during the Q&A afterwards, we'll ask Brenda. So please get those questions in, questions or comments, and we love to hear from you. Brenda will also be asking questions during her talk, so we want audience participation. So please make sure that you're attentive and add those answers to the chat during her talk. You will need to log into your Google or YouTube account to post using the comment feature, but if you don't have YouTube or a Google account, that's okay. You can submit your questions to info@janeaustenandcompany.org. We'll collect questions there as well and ask them for you.
And now, without further ado, we present Why Mr. Collins?
Okay, are we sorted out here? Okay. Excuse me. All right, it's great to be with you guys tonight. Glad to see so many old friends and new folks that I don't know yet, so that's wonderful. We're here to talk about Mr. Collins of Pride and Prejudice and the church and clergy in Jane Austen's novels. We'll have a time for questions at the end, as was mentioned, so feel free to put those in the chat. But I'm also going to ask you some questions as we go along, so please write your answers in the chat as quickly as you can. Think for a second first about how you feel about Mr. Collins. Do you love him? Maybe think he's hilarious? Can you not stand him because he's so awful? Do you both love him and hate him? I suppose that's true of many of us. Pride and Prejudice starts off with this famous statement, say it with me. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Thinking about Mr. Collins, though, we might rephrase this as a single clergyman in possession of a good living must also be in want of a wife, at least according to Lady Catherine de Bourgh. From the more cynical view of a woman in want of a husband, Charlotte Lucas thinks marriage was the only provision for well-educated young women of small fortune, and however uncertain of giving happiness, must be their pleasantest preservative from want, which is why she married Mr. Collins. So today we're going to take a deeper look at Mr. Collins as a clergyman or church minister, and why Jane Austen, a woman of deep faith, presented him the way she did. Was she ridiculing the clergy in general, as some people think? Sorry, I'm a little hoarse here. First, we're going to look a little bit at Jane Austen and the church and clergy. Then we'll consider Mr. Collins's imperfections and absurdities. Then we'll talk about how men like him got church livings at this time. A church living was essentially a job as the clergyman for a parish, though there was more to it than that, as we'll see. Then we'll see what Mr. Collins's rights as a rector were and the differences between rectors and other clergymen like vicars and curates. Then we'll look at his duties and whether he fulfilled them. Finally, we'll look at his proposal to Elizabeth, comparing that with the Book of Common Prayer, Handbook of the Church of England. And then we'll talk very briefly about evangelicals of that time and how their ideals compared with Mr. Collins's actions. Excuse me, got a frog in my throat here. So first, let's consider Jane Austen and the church. These are two churches she worshipped in regularly, Steventon on your right and Chawton on the left. Next, Jane Austen's father, her brother James, and her brother Henry were all clergymen, so she grew up in the parsonage at Steventon. Both Jane's naval brothers, Frank and Charles, were known for their Christian faith. Her brother Charles chose to bring her and Cassandra topaz crosses as a gift from abroad, indicating the importance of their faith. Jane has William Price bring Fanny a similar cross in Mansfield Park. Her family went regularly to church, usually Sunday mornings and afternoons or evenings. Her characters all attend church, even the least religious ones, Henry and Mary Crawford. Austen also read and enjoyed books of sermons and devotional books, like this Companion to the Altar, which she used to prepare for taking communion at church. The Austen family appears to have read prayers together daily in the mornings and evenings from the Book of Common Prayer, which gives daily prayers and scriptures to read throughout the year. Her father refers to this in a letter he wrote to her brother Frank. And after her father's death, the women apparently sometimes read Jane Austen's own prayers in the evenings. We have 3 of those still existing. They're beautiful, deep prayers. In one of them, she wrote, "Above all other blessings, O God, for ourselves and our fellow creatures, we implore thee to quicken our sense of thy mercy in the redemption of the world, of the value of that holy religion in which we have been brought up, that we may not by our own neglect throw away the salvation thou hast given us, nor be Christians only in name." It seems that Jane was a serious Christian personally. Austen's prayers also ask God for humility. Her faith deeply permeates her writings. In Pride and Prejudice, for example, we see both Darcy and Elizabeth coming to recognize their pride and their prejudices and repent and seek to change. In short, Christianity strongly influenced Jane Austen and her family's worldview, as well as the worldview of her society. With this background, we might wonder what her family thought of her bumptious clergyman, Mr. Collins. We know that her family loved Pride and Prejudice. Her father even tried to get it published, but he told the publisher very little about it, not even the title, and it was declined immediately. The publisher never saw the manuscript. We have some opinions of Emma that Jane wrote down, and in one she records that her mother said it had no characters in it equal to Lady Catherine and Mr. Collins, which implies that she enjoyed Mr. Collins. Obviously, her parents did not think Jane was attacking the clergy, her father's profession, in Pride and Prejudice. Most of her friends, including clergy and their wives, enjoyed Emma and the depictions of Mr. Elton, another flawed clergyman. Only a couple of people, the first probably a clergyman's wife and the second a clergyman, the ones that you see here, objected to her depictions of clergymen, thinking that in such times as these, she should not include negative stereotypes of clergymen. During the French Revolution and then the Napoleonic Wars, many in England were fearful that revolution would spread to England. They believed that going back to church and honoring God would protect England from that danger. They believed, quote, that respect for the church was vital to the maintenance of social order, unquote. So why did Austen disagree with them and sometimes satirize the clergy? Irene Collins, who wrote extensively about Jane Austen and the church, said, when Austen wrote satires of the church and clergy, of one thing we can be quite sure, she meant no harm. She had no wish at all to undermine people's respect for the church or their faith in the doctrines it preached. Like many members of the Church of England, both then and now, Jane Austen looked upon the imperfections and absurdities in the behavior of the clergy with tolerant amusement. When she invented Mr. Collins, it seems never to have occurred to her that she might be undermining his calling or bringing the whole body of clergy into disrepute. Jane Austen knew many, many clergymen of different ranks in society and levels of education. 123 clergymen are mentioned by name in her letters. So she no doubt knew faithful, excellent clergymen like her father and brothers, probably clergymen who were proud like Mr. Collins, others looking for advancement like Mr. Elton, and even gluttons like Dr. Grant. Austen wrote to entertain as well as to improve the situations she was satirizing. She was not out to destroy the church or her society. She shows the foibles and flaws of some clergymen, but she does not show them as totally evil. In fact, in Mansfield Park, she strongly defends the clergy. Think about what do you think is the worst thing that either Mr. Collins or Mr. Elton or Dr. Grant does in the novels? You can write some of those in the chat. Any ideas about what the worst things are that they do? Okay, possibly the worst, in my opinion, is when Mr. Elton refuses to dance with Harriet. For Mr. Collins, of course, the letters he writes about Lydia are horribly judgmental, and we'll look at those later. I doubt that Austen expected, next slide. I doubt that Austen expected Mr. Collins to be her most famous clergyman, and I don't imagine she thought that people would think she was criticizing all the church and clergy because of him. In fact, a number of Austen's characters are Church of England clergymen, what Americans would usually call ministers or pastors. 3 of Austen's heroes are clergymen: Edmund Bertram of Mansfield Park, Edward Ferrars of Sense and Sensibility, and Henry Tilney of Northanger Abbey. These men are not perfect, but they are generally good people. Which of her minor characters are clergymen that she makes fun of? Can you write some ideas in the chat? Minor characters which are clergymen that she makes fun of. Okay, well, let's go on. Mr. Collins of Pride and Prejudice. Next. Mr. Collins of Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Elton in Emma, and Dr. Grant in Mansfield Park are the minor ones she makes fun of. These men have some major flaws, though they seem to do these adequately. Other clergymen are minors in the novel that she does satirize. Anybody have ideas about that? Characters who are, but she does fun in them. Well, it's Mr. Moore and Jane and Peter. These men show us some of the challenges facing the church at the time: the need for one clergyman to take multiple livings to support his family, and the low pay and social position of curates. And for extra kudos, what clergymen are discussed, but we don't actually see them. Okay, we have one person has already told us one of them. It's Dr. Davies. Anne Steele's Dr. Davies. We know he's a clergyman, not a medical doctor, because Anne says, I should write to the doctor to get Edward the curacy of his new living. And the others are Dr. Shirley of Persuasion, Captain Wentworth's brother, and Mr. Norris in Mansfield Park. Someone's saying Charles Hayter wasn't popular. He was popular with Henrietta. He wasn't so popular maybe with other people, but he's not satirized. He's not made fun of. His main problem is that he's a curate and he's poor because of that. So that's 13 clergymen in the novels, plus 1 or 2 others who are only distantly mentioned, and most of them are good men. Only 3 of the 13 are satirized. And by the way, there were no women clergy in the Church of England until 1994. Now, you may wonder, why is Mr. Collins called Mr. and not Reverend? Most Anglican clergymen at this time were called Mr., as we see in Austen's novels. Those with an advanced degree from Oxford or Cambridge were called Doctor, like Dr. Grant and Dr. Shirley. Reverend was a much more formal term, usually used in writing, as we see in this quote from Sanditon about a clergyman who had signed the list of subscribers to the Sanditon Library. I think this emphasizes that the clergy were like everyone else in Austen's England. As Austen's admired Samuel Johnson said, a man who is good enough to go to heaven is good enough to be a clergyman. And the clergy had their faults like everyone else. They weren't expected to be perfect. By the way, you may also wonder about the clothes these clergymen are wearing. Mary Crawford in Mansfield Park says there is no distinction of dress nowadays. For everyday occasions, the clergy dressed like other gentlemen, though usually in black, which was a fashionable color. So the clergy looked like other men of their class. In these pictures, you see the clerical bands, these white things on their collars, and their long black gowns. Those were worn only in church when they were performing services. In the 1995 Pride and Prejudice, Collins wears his only at church, which is correct. Mr. Elton, though, in the 2020 Emma, wears his all the time, which he would not have done. Dr. Grant, in this picture, is wearing his outside of a church, but that's a C.E. Brock illustration from the early 1900s, and things had changed by then. But again, in Austen's time, clergymen even dressed like everyone else. Now let's look more specifically at Mr. Collins. What do you think are Mr. Collins's worst faults? Write those in the chat. What do you think are his worst faults? And no ideas? All right, let's go to the next slide. from the novel, we have these descriptions. We have some coming up here: obsequious, arrogance, vanity, clueless. That's right. Misplaced pride. Yes, misplaced pride. He's a toady. He's self-important, a flatterer. There you go. Those are a lot of his faults. Blunt when he shouldn't be. Definitely clueless. All right, what Jane Austen specifically tells us about him is that he was a tall, heavy-looking young man of 25. His air was grave and stately, and his manners were very formal. He was pompous, a mixture of servility and self-importance, pride and obsequiousness, self-importance and humility. He was absurd, stupid. He had neither manner nor sense. Charlotte, who marries him, thinks of him as neither sensible nor agreeable. His society was irksome. He's excessive in compliments and apologies, flatters himself and others. Certainly, he's an unpleasant person, and he doesn't change. At the end of the novel, he is still proud and boasting. Someone asked, why is his name Collins and not Bennett? He's a distant cousin, so probably from the female line. These are all imperfections and absurdities rather than serious vices. Pride is considered a sin, but in Mr. Collins, it was mixed with excessive humility, which is a virtue. And it's interesting that, as one of you mentioned, Austen tells us how Mr. Collins ended up like this. He came from a difficult background. He doesn't have the advantage of a good family upbringing or even a good education. Austen writes, Mr. Collins was not a sensible man, and the deficiency of nature had been but little assisted by education or society, meaning that a good education or the companionship of good people might have taught him some sense, but he didn't have those advantages. The greatest part of his life having been spent under the guidance of an illiterate and miserly father. Illiterate now doesn't mean his father couldn't read, most likely, but it means he was not well educated. Austen also uses the word illiterate to describe Lucy Steele of Sense and Sensibility and Robert Martin of Emma, both of whom could certainly read and write. And though he belonged to one of the universities, he had merely kept the necessary terms without forming at it any useful acquaintance. The subjection in which his father had brought him up, he had no opportunity to learn to lead well or make his own decision, had given him originally great humility of manner, but it was now a good deal counteracted by the self-conceit of a weak head living in retirement and the consequential feelings of early and unexpected prosperity. We can find a little sympathy here, or at least an explanation of Collins's disadvantaged background. There's no mention of his mother, so maybe she had died early on. He's emotionally and socially insecure and immature. He probably is not used to being in a gentleman's house, and he's uncomfortable. He shows that when he asks the Bennets who cooked the meal. He's impressed with his surroundings all the time, even in the Phillipses' modest home. He says proudly that in 6 months he's been asked 3 times to Rosings Park, twice for dinner, and once to make up the card table. That doesn't seem like much for 6 months. On the plus side, he at least has good intentions in wanting to make sure the Bennets would be taken care of after Mr. Bennet dies, though he's not even unselfish about that. He says if he found the daughters as handsome and amiable as he had heard, then he would marry one of them. This was his plan of amends, of atonement for inheriting their father's estate, and he thought it an excellent one, full of eligibility and suitableness, and excessively generous and disinterested on his own part. So even this plan reflects his pride and self-complacency. From the same passage, we learn that a fortunate chance had recommended him to Lady Catherine de Bourgh. She now made his decisions for him, rather than his father. The respect which he felt for her high rank and his veneration for her as his patroness, mingling with a very good opinion of himself, of his authority as a clergyman, and his right as a rector, made him altogether a mixture of pride and obsequiousness, self-importance and humility. Mr. Collins is not exactly sure where he fits in society. He doesn't really know the rules. He apologizes much too long, even when he doesn't need to, and compliments far too much. Mrs. Phillips and her sister, Mrs. Bennet, who are from a more middle-class level, are quite impressed by his excess of good breeding, but it's really an imitation of good breeding. He's a flatterer, trying to move up in society by flattering those above him, and he does this very deliberately. He even practices his flattery. He's trying to do what he thinks is expected of him, but he never does it well, poor man. While Austen said she didn't take her characters directly from real life, she may easily have known proud or foolish clergymen similar to Mr. Collins. One real clergyman of Jane Austen's time met a young man, an aspiring clergyman, who sounds much like Mr. Collins. Parson William Holland of Somerset wrote, "Young Blake seems much inclined to enter in the state of matrimony, but expects fortune, beauty, and everything else of the lady's side, but has nothing to offer on his side but his precious self, and has no notion that self could meet a refusal from anyone. It's strange that men should be so blind to their own defects. This man is one of the last I should think of were I a woman. Nothing in person or manner, nothing in fortune, and not much either in learning or sense. In short, he appears to me to have nothing but extreme presumption on his side. He speaks as if he was the perfection of human nature. I was indeed astonished at what he said, but laughed and suffered him to run on." Unlike this gentleman, Mr. Collins at least has a home and income to offer his wife. This man, like Hugh Thompson's image of Mr. Collins, has an inflated self-image. But I think if Austen were really trying to put down the church and clergy, she could have made Mr. Collins a much worse character. What good characteristics does he have? Write them in the chat if you can think of any good characteristics of Mr. Collins. Next slide while you think about that. The only one I see actually listed in the novel is respectability. We're told 3 times by 3 different people that Mr. Collins was respectable. That means he was considered a good, decent man. We cringe for Charlotte marrying him, but at the same time, do we think he's going to go off and gamble their money away? Probably not. Or get drunk all the time? Or run around with other women? These were fashionable vices of the time, and Austen has characters like that, but not her clergymen. We know Mr. Collins is an idiot, but we expect his very solid wife, Charlotte, to keep him from doing anything disastrously stupid, and we don't expect him to do anything really evil. I'm looking at what some of your answers are, and I see he was quirky and well-meaning, a strategic thinker. That's good. Willing to make amends for having the estate entail Jim, not vicious. Tries to please. We don't think that he would hit Charlotte. He means well and is not unkind. He's employed and has a house. He likes to garden. He's trying to do right. He's attentive to the ladies. Okay, so that's quite a few good characteristics of Mr. Collins. I like that. Another comment is telling. Elizabeth calls Mr. Collins an oddity. Austen is not saying that he's your average clergyman like lots of other people. She's saying that he's unique. Edmund Bertram makes a similar statement in Mansfield Park when Mary Crawford criticizes Dr. Grant. Edmund says lazy, gluttonous clergy, quote, are not so common as to justify Miss Crawford in esteeming it their general character, unquote. Austen is not making a sweeping generalization here about the clergy. Also, Mr. Collins's characteristics are not unique, even in the novel, so they're not really connected to his being a clergyman. He's foolish, but so is who else in the novel? Oops, that already came up. All right, Mrs. Bennet. And several times we see that he and she think alike and react alike. She and her sister, Mrs. Phillips, even admire things Mr. Collins says. His exaggerated sense of courtliness and respect for rank are a lot like whose? Anybody have a guess at that? Who do his courtliness and respect of rank remind you of? Okay, there's apparently a time lag here, so I'm just going to go ahead with this. Okay, go on. Next, Sir William Lucas's. When Sir William visits him, it seems all Sir William can do when nobility are around is imitate Mr. Collins in his words and his bowing. I even wonder if for Charlotte, growing up with such a father made it easier for her to adapt to and manage Mr. Collins, who had so many similar characteristics. His excessive pride, of course, reminds me of, next, Mr. Darcy. Both think highly of themselves. Darcy, though, shows it with rudeness at the beginning, while Collins shows it with excessive civility. Finally, we have another person in the novel who at least claims he wanted to be a clergyman, and he is as opposite to Mr. Collins as can be. Who is it? Next. Mr. Wickham. Mr. Wickham appears shortly after Mr. Collins in the same chapters. When Wickham talks to Elizabeth, he made her feel that the commonest, dullest, most threadbare topic might be rendered interesting by the skill of the speaker. This is the opposite of Mr. Collins, whose conversation is pompous nothings, excessive and not sensible. In terms of preaching, Wickham probably would have done better than Collins if he had become a clergyman. But Austen obviously approves of Wickham not becoming a clergyman. She apparently thought the character was more important than fluent speaking. Sorry, I had to go down here. And Mr. Collins, as we've seen, was at least respectable, while Wickham was not. How did a man like Mr. Collins get to be a clergyman with his own parish? He had to complete university, get ordained, find a patron who could give him a church living, and then to move up further, he might get more livings. In some ways, Jane Austen was presenting Mr. Collins as a popular stereotype, one that she knew her readers would enjoy and laugh at. She gives him his own individuality, his own story, but she also draws on popular ideas. This satirical cartoon of the time shows a clergyman much like Mr. Collins or Mr. Elton or Dr. Grant. It makes fun of clergy whose main goal was to move up in the world, not to serve God or the people they were supposed to shepherd. We're going to look at this cartoon and some others in some detail, seeing how Mr. Collins reflects these popular stereotypes that Jane Austen's readers would have recognized and enjoyed. The aspiring clergyman in that cartoon, the clerical exercise, begins at Oxford or Cambridge University, where he is mostly showing off. And by the way, those were the only two universities in England at that time. Pride and Prejudice says of Mr. Collins, though he belonged to one of the universities, he had merely kept the necessary terms, he'd gone to school for the time he was supposed to, without forming at it any useful acquaintance. So Collins didn't make acquaintances who could help him grow in sense or wisdom, or help him advance in the church. About 60% of students at the universities were preparing to be clergymen. They studied the same subjects as everyone else, plus one extra theology course, which they only had to show up for. They did, though, have to attend chapel, usually daily, so they got very familiar with the Church of England services. Next, the aspiring clergyman had to get ordained, and to do that, he needed a patron who was offering him a church position at one of the 11,600 parish churches in England. Usually that would have been a starting position as a curate, an assistant or substitute clergyman. But Mr. Collins, by fortunate chance, was offered a rectory by Lady Catherine de Bourgh. So in the cartoon, the aspiring clergyman approaches his patron with a bow and asks for a living with cap in hand. With a lower bow, he then takes leave of his patron. We can just imagine Mr. Collins getting his living from Lady Catherine just like that. Now, with a proud air, the new clergyman gets ordained by a bishop. For this, he would have to pass some kind of examination, light or difficult, and need some kind of recommendation. And finally, he proudly takes possession of his living. Mr. Collins's patroness is obviously very important to him. Lady Catherine held what is called an advowson for a church parish. That meant whenever the parish clergyman died or resigned, she had the right to choose the new one. There are still holders of advowsons in the Church of England today. Getting a living was almost entirely about who you knew, or if you had money, you could buy the next presentation of a living. Ideally, patrons were supposed to choose clergymen who would be good for their communities, but many instead sold livings or gave them to relatives and friends. Jane Austen's father and other relatives and connections received their livings from relatives. In the novel, some clergy get their livings from family connections. Henry Tilney and Edmund Bertram get theirs from their fathers. They are family livings. James Morland's father owns the advowson for one of his own livings, so he can give it to his son. Others get their livings from more distant connections. Charles Hayter gets a temporary living this way, and hopes to get a permanent living from family friends who know a bishop. Dr. Grant eventually gets a seat at Westminster from a distant connection. Only one clergyman in Austen buys his living. Dr. Grant buys the Mansfield Park living from Sir Thomas before Mr. Norris's death, when Tom Bertram has run up extensive debts. You could not buy the next presentation of a living after the incumbent died. You had to buy it before. Two clergymen in Austen, though, get their livings from a virtual stranger. Edward Ferrars gets his from Colonel Brandon because of Edward's good behavior. Mr. Collins simply by chance, we're told, though we can guess that he probably flattered Lady Catherine, don't you think? Apparently, the parson at Hunsford had died, and Lady Catherine had to find someone else within 6 months, or else the bishop would take over her right to do that. She didn't have any relatives or friends who needed livings, or maybe she wasn't speaking to them, and she hadn't sold it before the incumbent died, and she somehow came across Mr. Collins. For Mr. Elton, by the way, we don't know how he got his living. Probably not from Mr. Knightley, since he was the squire of an adjacent parish, Donwell, not of Highbury. There was probably another clergyman between Mr. Bates and Mr. Elton, since Mr. Elton had only been there a year, and Miss Bates has been caring for her ailing mother on a small income all through her middle of life, Austen tells us. So they all got their livings in different ways. How fortunate was Mr. Collins? He calls himself a young man who has been so fortunate as I have been in early preferment, getting a living so soon. Of aspiring clergymen, after graduation and ordination, approximately 20% got a living within 5 years. These usually had family connections like Edmund Bertram, Henry Tilney, and James Morland, and of course George and James Austen. 20% got a living later within 15 years. 15% eventually got a living after more than 15 years. 45%, almost half of them, never got a living, either remaining curates, dying young, or turning to other professions such as teaching. So Mr. Collins did have a very good reason to be grateful to Lady Catherine, and apparently she gave him a living with a good income. Many livings did not provide enough to live on. Without her, he might have languished in a curacy of £50 a year or less for the rest of his life, and possibly would never have married. Once he got his living, though, it was for life. The clergyman didn't really have to do anything if he chose to hire someone else, a curate, to do his basic duties. He could only be removed by a bishop for gross immorality, and even that was very difficult. Lady Catherine could not fire Mr. Collins. So why did he keep making up to her? Elizabeth wonders the same thing, but she quickly figures it out. She realizes there might be other family livings to be disposed of. Lady Catherine could increase the Collinses' income substantially by giving him another living. Some families owned multiple advowsons. They could assign the clergyman for several parishes. For instance, Wickham. He wants the best living in Darcy's gift, meaning Darcy can assign several livings, and Wickham, of course, wants the one that provides the highest income. Also, at the end of Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Bennet tells Mr. Collins he should stick with Darcy rather than Lady Catherine because Darcy has more to give. In other words, he has more livings to assign than Lady Catherine does. Charlotte also mentions that Mr. Darcy had considerable patronage in the church. Mr. Collins wants to be what was called a pluralist, a clergyman holding more than one living. This cartoon caricatures pluralists, showing a fat clergyman with one church on his head and two others under his arms. In Austen's time, about a third of clergymen held more than one living. Many of the parishes in England were quite small and didn't provide enough income for a clergyman to live on, so they really needed to have more than one parish. Mr. Collins, though, talks about the valuable rectory he holds, meaning he got a good income. So he just wanted more money. If he does get a second living, how will he handle it? Well, if the two parishes are close together, he might serve both of them. Jane Austen's father did that. He served both Steventon and Dean, which were just 2 miles apart. More commonly, a clergyman would live in one parish and hire a poorly paid curate to serve the others. Only about 6% of the clergy had 3 or more livings. In the 1830s, the Church of England began to phase out pluralism. So they were already becoming aware it wasn't a great thing at this time. So Mr. Collins was grateful to Lady Catherine for giving him a living right after graduation, and he was hopeful of more. He also appreciated that he had the right of a rector, the highest rung of country clergymen. He was not a vicar or a curate. What did that mean? It had to do with income. A church living provided a job with certain responsibilities. Just over half of the parishes also included a livable parsonage for the clergyman to live in. Mr. Collins is very proud of his parsonage and often boasts about it, but that becomes more understandable when we think about half the parishes not even having a parsonage that was livable. Church livings provided an income that changed from year to year depending on the farmer's prosperity. The money came in from tithes, glebe, and fees. Everyone in the parish was legally required to pay the clergyman a tenth of their income, a tithe, either in crops and animals or in cash. Many livings also had farmland called glebe attached. Jane Austen calls this land meadow. In Pride and Prejudice, when Mr. Collins wants to take his visitors around his 2 meadows, he is showing off the sources of his income. He apparently has a fair bit of glebe land belonging to the living, which he farms, or has someone farm in order to increase his income. He was also paid fees for performing church ceremonies. In the country, where there were few people in a parish, this provided very little money. In the cities, though, fees might be a clergyman's main source of income. Mr. Collins mentions these ceremonies, which were some of his duties, and provided some of his income. In his initial letter to the Bennets, Mr. Collins talks about his willingness to perform the rites and ceremonies of the Church of England. Elizabeth tells us what this means: to christen or baptize, to marry, and to bury his parishioners as needed. What Austen wants us to laugh at, and what surprises Elizabeth, is that Collins feels the need to boast of doing these basic obligations. Each parish traditionally had a rector or a vicar, with possibly a curate to help him. If a parish had a vicar, someone else was officially the rector, usually the patron. The difference between these roles, the difference between these roles was in income. There were 2 types of tithes listed in traditional parish agreements. The great tithes were things arising from the ground, grain, hay, wood, and so forth. The clergyman in this cartoon is carrying the great tithes under his arm. The small tithes were usually things nourished by the ground, such as animals, poultry, and eggs. The clergyman in the cartoon is carrying the small tithes in his baskets. A rector received all the tithes from a parish, the great and small tithes, so his income was highest. A vicar received only a part of the tithes, the small tithes. On average, a vicar got about a quarter of what a rector would have received. The nominal rector elsewhere got the rest. A curate got a salary, less than the tithes. A curate was considered more like a hired man. He usually got less than half of what a vicar received, often £50 a year or less, not really enough to support a family. And by the way, these terms are still used in the Church of England today, but they're used with totally different meanings. But this is what they meant in Jane Austen's time. Okay, of Jane Austen's characters, which of these is a vicar? Who can tell me? Anybody know? Which one is a vicar? He has a vicarage. All right, next, it's Mr. Elton of Emma. Mrs. Bates, the widow of the former vicar, lives in poverty. Mr. Elton has a lower income because he's a vicar and not a rector, so he needed to marry money. Which one is a lowly curate? Next, Charles Hayter of Persuasion is the only curate who actually makes part of one of the stories. The rest of these are all presumably rectors, but only Mr. Collins boasts of his rights as a rector. Here's what Mr. Collins might look like in a few years, at least according to popular stereotypes. At the Netherfield Ball, Mr. Collins says the rector of a parish has much to do. In the first place, he must make such an agreement for tithes as may be beneficial to himself and not offensive to his patron. The clergyman received tithes, and the patron, if he or she was the major landowner of the parish, received rents. If either rents or tithes were too high, the people could not pay the other. So the clergyman and the landowner had to balance out what they were each asking for. Here, Austen is not attacking the practice of tithes, which provided her own father and brother's incomes, but she is making fun of Mr. Collins, who thinks increasing his own income is the first and most important responsibility of a clergyman. On the second line of the clerical exercise cartoon, holding a long list, the new clergyman inspects the tithes, checking out his income, then pockets the cash and professes humility. This clergyman, like Mr. Collins, is concerned first with his income, then with appearing humble, though he really isn't. When Collins wants to introduce himself to Mr. Darcy, without waiting for someone else to appropriately introduce him, or for Mr. Darcy's permission for the introduction, which was necessary too, he says a clergyman is equivalent to the highest rank in the kingdom, provided that a proper humility of behavior is at the same time maintained. Mr. Collins is proud, like this cartoon clergyman, but professing humility. We also see Mr. Collins's pride in a remark he makes to Elizabeth when she asks him if he's going to dance at the Netherfield ball. Mr. Collins was very far from dreading a rebuke either from the Archbishop or Lady Catherine de Bourgh by venturing to dance. In the hierarchy of the Church of England, the highest rank was the king or queen, and then the archbishops. There were only two of them. Mr. Collins thinks that the archbishop, who was over thousands of clergymen, would notice whether or not he danced at a ball. And he puts his patroness, Lady Catherine, at the same level as the archbishop. Mansfield Park shows us how seriously Jane Austen took the clergy. Here's what Edmund Bertram, an aspiring clergyman, says. A clergyman has the charge of all that is of the first importance to mankind, individually or collectively considered, temporally and eternally, the guardianship of religion and morals, and consequently of the manners, by which he meant moral behavior, which result from their influence. No one here can call the office nothing. If the man who holds it is so, it's by the neglect of his duty, by foregoing its just importance and stepping out of his place to appear what he ought not to appear. So let's consider Mr. Collins. Did he neglect his duty, forgo its just importance, or step out of his place? Well, to understand that, we need to look at the duties of a clergyman at this time. Mr. Collins thought these were his jobs. At the Netherfield ball, he boasted that a rector needed to negotiate tithes, write sermons, perform parish duties, care for his parsonage, and be attentive and conciliatory toward everyone, especially his patron. The first of these and the last two were for his own benefit. We've looked at tithes. Let's consider sermon writing. Mr. Collins makes an odd remark here, and I think someone mentioned this in the chat. He says Lady Catherine had been graciously pleased to approve of both of the discourses which he had already had the honor of preaching before her. Why would he have only preached 2 sermons to her in the 6 months he had been serving? Well, this cartoon clergyman is told, purchase your sermon. Clergymen often preach sermons written by someone else. Many books of sermons by many preachers were available. So Mr. Collins probably means that he only wrote 2 sermons himself during that time and read the rest from collections. Sermons were standard in churches at the time, so it's unlikely that Mr. Collins only preached twice. And Lady Catherine, she really liked to impress people, so it's also unlikely that she was not showing herself at church each Sunday, I think. In Mansfield Park, we also hear this idea of preaching sermons from books. Mary Crawford says a clergyman should have the sense to prefer Blair's sermons to his own, and those were popular published sermons. We're not told anything about Mr. Collins's sermons except that he says Lady Catherine graciously approved of them, which of course may or may not be true, since he also thought Mr. Darcy was pleased with him introducing himself, which does not appear to be true at all. Mr. Collins is clueless, as was mentioned earlier. Mr. Collins's long formal speeches are mentioned several times, so we can easily imagine that his sermons, usually read from books, put his congregation to sleep, as this cartoon of the time shows. Next, Mr. Collins mentions his parish duties, though they're tucked in as a minor detail. Austen mentions a number of duties of a clergyman in her novels. Next slide. I think Mr. Collins performed some of these duties with pride. He would have read prayers, meaning leading worship services from the Book of Common Prayer, along with preaching sermons and occasionally writing sermons, performing church ceremonies, as we've seen, and he likely took care of parish business as needed. We do know that he considers peacemaking his duty, and he boasts of that when he tries to make peace with the Bennets. It was also a clergyman's duty to provide many services to the community, especially if he was resident. He might have visited the poor, as Mr. Elton does. Charlotte might have provided medicines and education for the people of the parish. However, we do find Mr. Collins abdicating some of his parish responsibilities. Clergymen were often the parish magistrate, settling disputes. Here we find that Lady Catherine did that instead. Mr. Collins, as a clergyman, should have helped the poor and taken their side if the landowner was oppressing them. Instead, he tells Lady Catherine about any problems, and she takes care of them in her high-handed way. She sallied forth into the village to settle their differences, silence their complaints, and scold them into harmony and plenty. Rebuking rather than helping, silencing rather than listening. So in this way, Mr. Collins is failing in his duties. Austen is again presenting Mr. Collins as a popular stereotype here. The clergyman who toadied to the landowner, who took their side against the people of the parish, was already a character in popular literature, and Austen knew that it would entertain her readers. The clergyman had another duty which Edmund talks about in Mansfield Park, the duty to influence public manners or behavior to set a good moral example. Mr. Collins, however, does not fulfill this duty as well as he should. We see this in 2 letters that he writes. When he learns of Lydia and Wickham's elopement, Mr. Collins writes Mr. Bennet a very harsh letter. He says, "The death of your daughter would have been a blessing in comparison with this. Throw off your unworthy child from your affection forever." We find the language shocking, but he is using standard phrases and expressing the norm of his society. It was commonly believed that a woman could never erase the shame of sexual impropriety, and almost all writers of the time would have agreed. It was also widely believed that death was the only way to cover such shame. The shame would affect the whole family, as we see in the novel. And Mr. Collins is suggesting what many would have said, that the unworthy child should be cast out. This happens in Mansfield Park when Maria, after leaving her husband and committing adultery, is shut away in a remote location. The problem is that Mr. Collins says he is expressing sympathy and goes on to say that he is trying to comfort them, while he says all the horrible things everyone else would have been saying, and even accuses them of having caused the problem themselves. He certainly should not be speaking so harshly to the Bennet family, even if he believes all this. And I think that Austen puts these stock phrases in Mr. Collins's mouth to show that the ideas themselves are excessive and unkind. After Lydia's marriage, Mr. Collins writes another harsh letter. He says that if he didn't write it, he would be neglecting the duties of his station as a clergyman, his duty to encourage moral behavior. However, since he's not the rector of Longbourn, it's not really his job to address this, and of course he doesn't know all of the story. He condemns the Bennets accepting Lydia and Wickham in their home, which of course Mr. Bennet originally did not want to do. Mr. Collins claims it's an encouragement of vice, which is also what Sir Thomas Bertram said about receiving Maria into his home after her transgression. However, unlike Maria, Lydia is now married. The ironic part is where Collins tells Mr. Bennet he should forgive them, but never see them or hear about them again. In this, he's different from Sir Thomas, who continues to support Maria. Mr. Bennet rightly exclaims that Mr. Collins does not know what Christian forgiveness is. Forgiveness is basic to Christianity. In fact, the Lord's Prayer asks God to forgive us as we forgive others. But Mr. Collins does not understand or follow that basic Christian principle. So here again, he's failing in his duties as a clergyman, even while he thinks he is fulfilling those duties. So we see that Mr. Collins does some of his duties, but fails in some that require deeper understanding of Christian faith. He overemphasizes the importance of his position and pays more attention to his income and home than to his responsibilities. Also, when he introduces himself to Darcy, he is stepping out of his place. Well, Mr. Collins also thought it was his duty as a clergyman to get married, setting an example of matrimony for his parish. Some in the lower classes didn't get married, but just lived together. So that's why he needed to set an example. Hugh Thompson, in this illustration for the Peacock Pride and Prejudice, shows Mr. Collins looking over the young ladies as if he is choosing a cow or a horse. And he apparently thinks about marriage in much that way. I love this picture. His proposal to Elizabeth is, of course, pompous and self-centered. He doesn't really know how to go about it. The marriage service in the Book of Common Prayer, Handbook of the Church of England, spells out how marriage should be approached and reasons for marriage. Mr. Collins gives his own very different reasons. The Book of Common Prayer says that matrimony is to be approached reverently, discreetly, advisedly, soberly, and in the fear of God, duly considering the causes for which matrimony was ordained. Mr. Collins, though, switches women in the time it takes Mrs. Bennet to stir the fire rather than considering carefully. You want to go back a little bit, Maisie? We're not quite there yet. And he seems to be acting more in the fear and reverence of Lady Catherine de Bourgh than of God. Next. The BCP says marriage is for the procreation of children as a remedy against sin and for the mutual society, help, and comfort that the one ought to have of the other, both in prosperity and adversity. In contrast, in a businesslike way, Mr. Collins lists for Elizabeth his more selfish reasons for marriage: his reputation, setting an example in the parish, his happiness, and making Lady Catherine happy, which he says maybe should have been first. So those are very different reasons. In the Book of Common Prayer, next, the husband must promise to love, comfort, honor, and keep his wife. Mr. Collins, though, lists no benefits to Elizabeth, no thought of her happiness or who she is or how he might love her. Instead, he says he wants to make amends for inheriting Longbourn, which Jane calls making an atonement that he thinks is due, and Elizabeth calls avoiding self-reproach. It seems that he considers this almost a religious duty, which in a way it was. The Bible commands that a person care for widows and orphans, especially among his relatives. In Sense and Sensibility, we see John Dashwood, Eleanor and Mary Ann's half-brother, failing to perform that duty to care for widows and orphans of his family, as Jane Austen makes quite clear. Mr. Collins at least has good intentions in wanting to make sure the Bennets would be taken care of, though his pride and self-importance make him go about it in an offensive way, as if marriage were simply a business arrangement. He makes his proposal even more offensive by speaking several times of her father's death and mentioning exactly how much her dowry will be, but says he won't rebuke her for that. He thinks, probably from reading novels, that he should assure her of the violence of his affections, but Elizabeth knows his feelings are totally imaginary. Elizabeth says, "We won't make each other happy, and Lady Catherine won't like me." He says, "Nonsense, of course she'll marry me. Why? I'm not unworthy, at least in his own eyes. I'm offering you a good establishment, my situation in life, my connections with Lady Catherine, my connections with your family. Your lack of dowry means you might not get another offer." So to Mr. Collins, marriage is all about money and connections. And those, of course, are the reasons that Charlotte does accept him. Elizabeth, though, is looking for love and for the mutual society, help, and comfort that the one ought to have of the other, both in prosperity and adversity, as the Book of Common Prayer says. An important criterion for Austen and for Elizabeth was that a person should respect their partner in life. Jane tries to persuade Elizabeth that Charlotte may feel some regard and esteem for Mr. Collins, or some respect for him. Elizabeth responds, "Were I persuaded that Charlotte had any regard for him, I should only think worse of her understanding than I now do of her heart. The woman who marries him cannot have a proper way of thinking. You shall not, for the sake of one individual, change the meaning of principle and integrity, nor endeavor to persuade yourself or me that selfishness is prudence, and insensibility of danger, security for happiness." So the fact that Charlotte cannot respect Mr. Collins goes against principle, by which Austen means religious principles. Mr. Bennet expands on this, saying that Elizabeth must esteem her husband. He says, "My child, let me not have the grief of seeing you unable to respect your partner in life." Here he's referring to a principle from the Bible, which says that a wife should respect her husband. I think Austen would also agree that the husband needed to respect his wife. Mr. Bennet obviously wishes he had married a partner he could respect. We don't have time today to go into all that was happening in the church of Austen's day, though you can read about that in my book, Fashionable Goodness. But the evangelical movement started around this time and led many changes in England and the world. Austen didn't like it at first, but was much more positive about it later. She even said that she thought perhaps they all should be evangelicals, and at least those who were so from reason and feeling were happiest and safest. The evangelicals were calling people to a serious personal faith in God, which was acted out in their lives, not just on Sundays. In this era, the evangelicals were led by William Wilberforce. His two great goals were to abolish the slave trade and to reform the manners of England, making good behavior fashionable rather than immorality. And the evangelicals and other Christians of the time succeeded in both goals. And that's where the title of my book, Fashionable Goodness, came from. They were bringing good behavior into fashion. I think Austen shared at least that second goal of promoting virtuous behavior, and probably the first goal of abolishing the slave trade. Mr. Collins was certainly not an evangelical. Lady Catherine would not have approved. He focused on externals, not on the heart, as the evangelicals did. But in some of his external behavior, he did have some things in common with them. He rejected novels. This wasn't something Austen would have had all clergymen do, since her family enjoyed novels. Also in Northanger Abbey, clergyman Henry Tilney, probably Austen's most beloved clergyman, loves novels, as do the Morlands, a clergy family. In Sanditon, Austen satirizes the idea that people who read novels will imitate the villains, since Sir Edward Denham wants to do just that. The evangelicals generally approved of novels that were realistic and had a moral message, like those of Richardson, one of Austen's favorites, and I would add those of Austen. They rejected novels with what they called improper scenes of pleasure and passion, or where really bad examples were presented, thinking those would be harmful to readers. Collins likes Fordyce's sermons, which were very popular and well-known, and Fordyce was considered a moderate evangelical. Some of his advice would actually have been very valuable to Lydia, keeping her from being seduced by Wickham, if only she had listened. Collins has no objection, next, to music or dancing. His dancing is poor, which shows he hasn't had a thorough gentleman's education. Evangelical writers usually considered dancing and music innocent pastimes, unless they led to vanity or connected women with bad men like Wickham. In fact, evangelicals promoted music in the church, especially the use of hymns, which were new to the Church of England. Evangelicals considered time very valuable and wanted people to use it in beneficial ways. So they discouraged women from spending a lot of time learning music in order to show off for potential husbands, and then put it aside when they got married. Lady Middleton, in Sense and Sensibility, did exactly that, and Mrs. Elton implies that she will too. Mr. Collins gambles for low stakes, then talks about it for way too long. Evangelicals considered serious gambling a great evil, as it ruined whole families. Cards at home were not totally condemned, but were thought of as a way of wasting time. And evangelicals also warned that playing cards for small amounts might lead to a desire for higher stakes. So Mr. Collins has a few similar views to the evangelicals of his time, though he was not at all an evangelical himself. I think a major difference we see between Mr. Collins and the evangelicals was the view of the clergy. Mr. Collins's main concern was his own income, home, and relationship with the upper classes. He wanted more living so he could have more income and a higher place in society. Most people at that time saw the clergy merely as a job. The evangelicals, though, were introducing the idea that it was a calling from God, a great responsibility. Edmund Bertram reflects this in Mansfield Park when he says that the clergy has the charge of all that is of the first importance to mankind. He goes on to say, it will, I believe, be everywhere found that as the clergy are, or are not, what they ought to be, so are the rest of the nation. This is a much higher view of the clergy than Mr. Collins or Mr. Elton had. And I think, at least later in her life, this was Jane Austen's own view. She satirized men like Mr. Collins, both for entertainment and to get people thinking about what a clergyman should be and should not be. If you want to learn more about the church and faith in Austen's novels, these are some of my favorite books, the most readable ones I've found. along with some helpful articles you can find online and even a couple of fun novels about Charlotte Collins. I can email you this list plus more sources if you request it. And if you'd like to know more, I invite you to consider my book, Fashionable Goodness, Christianity in Jane Austen's England. I wrote it in order to share with you guys all I learned about the church, a very important part of Austen's world, in a way that's easy to understand and reference. Fashionable Goodness discusses the church and clergy in Austen's life and in her novels, and the people and movements that were influencing the church and the world at that time, including women. I had many questions about the church in Austen's novels and world, and I spent years researching to find the answers, which you can now access easily in this book. I also write about Austen, the church, and science at my blog and on Jane Austen's World. You might also enjoy my articles in Persuasions Online and in Jane Austen's Regency World magazine. You can email me with any questions. I'm working on a couple of other books right now, a novel and a book on Austen's clergymen and their wives. If you would like to be notified when those are available, please email me and ask to be added to my mailing list. I only send out newsletters once or twice a year, focused on resources you might find helpful. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I think I get to start off the questioning here. Brenda, I'm curious though, do you know about the Oxford English Dictionary entry of a Collins as a noun? I
don't actually.
It's from Mr. Collins that it means a thank you note. A very fulsome thank you note.
That's great. Did you know that, Becky? Wow.
Yes. Cool. Brenda has been sharing her Oxford English Dictionary login with me, which might not be allowed, but she's been very generous with that. Dictionary nerd.
But I wanted to. One of our listeners asked the perennial question about Mr. Collins here. Why not Mary Bennet, the one who appreciated him? She would have been a perfect match. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't know why Austen chose to do that. It does seem really an obvious choice, doesn't it? For him to marry Mary. And I've wished before that happened as well. But I guess maybe she thought, Charlotte is much older, and maybe she felt like Charlotte would be more desperate. And also Charlotte's very pragmatic, isn't she? Whereas Mary is kind of head in the sky. So I don't know, maybe she just felt like Charlotte was a better match for Mr. Collins. Or maybe she just wanted to raise the tension, because if Mary married him, then the family wouldn't be in this, in the bad straits that Elizabeth put them in, really, by not marrying Mr. Collins. So maybe she wanted to make it more tension. I don't know. Do y'all have different ideas?
I'd like to see what people say in the chat.
Yeah.
I like this. It says Mary would not have done well with the congregation, and Charlotte will be a wonderful minister's wife. I think that's probably true.
Huh.
But he didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Should I pick a question now? I think I can click this one and show it. Was it wrong or impolite of Mr. Collins that he didn't visit the Bennets until after his own father died? I feel like there's a lot of social and family dynamics going on there.
Yeah. Was it wrong or impolite? He thought it was the right thing to do because he was respecting, he felt like he was respecting his father, which you are supposed to respect your parents, by not, reconciling with someone that his father had chosen not to reconcile with. So I can see Mr. Collins's point of view, but yeah, we would think it would have been more polite for him to reconcile. But
isn't that another piece of evidence that he wasn't able to forgive, really?
His father wasn't able to forgive, or he wasn't able?
I would think it would be another nail in that coffin.
But Mr. Collins, he came, doesn't have any animosity toward them when he came to visit, right? Even though
he wants something.
Who knows what the issue supposedly was with his father? We don't know.
As I look through the audience questions, it strikes me that there's so many, like, was it wrong or impolite of Mr. Collins to do X, Y? Here's another one. Was it rude of Mr. Collins to rush off to marry Charlotte? And I just wonder if like we as readers today, we're just so struck by it, like as Elizabeth says, the oddity of Mr. Collins. Like he just does so many odd decisions throughout the novel, and maybe this rushing off and the rapidity of it is that odd for the time? What do you think?
I liked in the beginning when everybody was saying Mr. Collins was clueless. He really was clueless. Like he's not aware of what the social norms are really. Like he just kind of blunders along and does what he feels like. I don't know. But actually, I think his rushing off to marry Charlotte was because pride was hurt by Elizabeth rejecting him. And now he's like, but it's her fault because this other lady was willing to take me. So so I think it's a balm to his pride to do that. I think that's why he did it. Whether it was, the Bennets were kind of shocked by it, very shocked by it. So obviously it wasn't a normal thing to do. But if he's marrying without any real relationship, then I guess there's not a reason to wait.
Here's a Collins fan. And so I've heard this argument before. I think it's interesting to think about Mr. Collins in this way as a neurodivergent.
I would love to hear more from that person about why that is, because I'm not as familiar with that as I'd like to be. So
there's someone who wrote a book about neurodivergent Austen characters, and that was a chapter, I think.
Okay.
I've heard a lot of people call even Mr. Darcy neurodivergent or sort of on the spectrum because of his lack of social awareness and how sort of blunt he is. I think that's an interesting reading. Here is a question from Betty Parker Ellis. Is there a respectable ratio for how many sermons were read and purchased versus written themselves?
Oh, it varied hugely, Betty. Some clergymen would write all their own sermons and were quite proud of that. But it was more the clergymen who were not so much trying to do their duty as just trying to get by with what they could, who would read all their sermons. So even if they wrote sermons, they would use them repeatedly. So there was a copy of one of Mr. George Austen's sermons that he made notes like, okay, I preached this at Dean on this date. I preached this at Steventon on that date. I preached it, showing that he had preached it at different times. And if it was a good sermon, they didn't see anything wrong with just telling it over and over again because people needed to hear it again and again. So, but yeah, they would read sermons.
I was so fascinated by that part of your presentation. Like, I feel like that's a really rich, like, research area to think about, like, what kinds of sermons were read, and then what kinds of clergymen were reading their sermons versus creating their own. Even I feel like with Austen's clergymen, you could easily kind of play that game. Like, would Henry Tilney have been the kind of clergyman to read sermons or make his own sermons? Like, what would the ratio be for a Henry Tilney or an Edward Ferrars or an Edmund Bertram? Do you have and the image that you showed? Was that a cartoon, like a satirical cartoon, making fun of people purchasing sermons?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes, those were all satirical cartoons.
Yeah.
Somebody made it.
I'm on the satirical cartoons.
They were great. I love those.
Yeah.
Somebody made a great comment that Mr. Collins always seems to be speaking from a script, like even in his normal, his little elegant compliments that he arranged. I think that's an excellent sort of response to that question.
Yeah. Well, there's a question here related to that. What kind of clergyman would Henry Tilney make? There's some speculation that Henry Tilney is based on a real clergyman named Sidney Smith, who was known as the wittiest clergyman in England. And Austen actually might have met him because they had some acquaintances in common and were in the same place at the same time. So that would be another area for research, really, to look into Sidney Smith's life and see if we have any information about what kind of sermons he preached, or what kind of clergyman he was. But I don't know, Henry Tilney, I don't know, what do you guys think? What kind of clergyman do you think he was?
Yeah, we'd love to hear. And if you have other questions, please put them in the chat. For me, Henry Tilney loves novels, and I just imagine that kind of like coloring like the kind of clergyman that he is. I feel like his empathy, the way that he relates to his parish, would be kind of heightened because of that aspect.
I think you
The
might
other
have.
hand, very witty and might sometimes be over their heads,
That too. That too.
What were you saying?
Someone here has inserted a note of skepticism about the difference between the career and calling.
Oh,
Mr. Collins has no family or funds to rely on. Edmund Bertram does, so he has the luxury of a high calling.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
There were plenty of men who became clergymen without having family and funds to rely on, who did a much better job as a clergyman than Mr. Collins, as best we can tell, So, I don't think that's so much depending on the income. It's just, Edmund Bertram could have easily taken his job as a family job and done like Henry Crawford thought he was going to do, and just stayed at home and gone and preached every now and then. He could have done that, but he had a much higher ideal of what the clergy was. And so he was going to live in his parish and pour himself into that. So I don't really think it has to do with the income, but it has to do with the attitude. That's just my opinion.
Here is this is a question I also have. How do people live while waiting for a living to fall to them? 15 years is a long time to live without an income.
Okay, they would do different, but usually a curate and get pounds a year, which was enough to live on. Some of them would wait and get, some of them will go married and go
cutting out for you, Eric.
Yeah, you might have to repeat that.
Yeah.
Sorry,
you're cutting out. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so most of them would be curates during that time, which means they got a low income, barely enough to live on, but still, enough that they could get by, as long as they didn't have a family. If they had a family, they'd probably go into debt. And there were programs, a program called Queen Anne's Bounty, which helped some of the curates that were very low income. But it was a really difficult situation. But a lot of them would teach. Some of them might stay at the universities as fellows of the university until they got a living. And then, of course, they couldn't marry while they were fellows, but once they got a living, they could get married. So they might be teaching at one of the, private schools, public schools, they called them. So there were various things that they could do, but they didn't have a permanent living.
All right. So I think it's my turn. We've still got about 4 or 5 more minutes for Q&A and a lot of questions to get through. We'll get through as many as we can. This was kind of an interesting comment / question to kind of ponder. Mr. Collins is more worried about Lydia's marriage than his own at the end of Pride and Prejudice. It irks me, and I have to agree. It irks me that he says he got married to set a good parish example, but we never see him as a good husband to Charlotte. And so I think that at the end of the novel, that kind of hypocrisy that maybe Austen is exploring there, what is she up to with that, do you think?
I think that Mr. Collins thought he was a good husband to Charlotte. He was working for their financial prosperity, which seems to have been both of their goals, right? All this stuff with Lady Catherine, she was working together with him in pleasing Lady Catherine so that she would give them another living and, keep inviting them over to Rosings. So I don't see his marriage as being bad in their eyes, in his or Charlotte's eyes, really. But for Lydia, he's condemning her because she lived with him before marriage, which he did not do with Charlotte. So he wouldn't have thought of it as the same thing, I don't think.
Yeah.
Another question kind of about the transition between livings. It's also one of these etiquette questions. But should Mr. Collins have promised not to turn the ladies out of the house as soon as Mr. Bennet dies? But maybe you could comment on that particular practice of the church.
That wouldn't be a practice of the church. That would be, from his inheritance. It wouldn't really have to do with him being a clergyman. But I think we would have all liked for him to just say, well, I'm not going to turn you guys out. I think there's probably less likelihood that he would turn them out because he married Charlotte, who is Elizabeth's close friend. To me, that seems like that would mitigate some what he would do, but we're not really told in the novel what he's going to do in that situation, which has been a rich vein for Jane Austen fan fiction writers to speculate on things that could happen.
Could he have, can I like ask a follow-up question? Could he have started collecting the money from the living or from Longbourn while still letting the women live there? Or is it like you have to live here in order to, could he have, does that make sense?
I don't see why not. I mean, if he chose to stay in his parsonage rather than move into Longbourn, I don't think he would do that though, not Mr. Collins. Do you think so? I mean, he could certainly get the income from Longbourn and let them stay there.
Yeah. You don't think he would have extended that generosity?
Maybe if Charlotte convinced him, but it doesn't really seem likely to me because, you know, they're looking forward to inheriting Longbourn, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. But it seems like, I mean, it's probably a pretty big house, so they could probably let them live there. But again, this is all speculation. Jane Austen just doesn't tell us that.
Yeah.
He would have had options, but we don't know what he would have chosen.
Well, here's another, I like these questions that are sort of your technical expertise that could, so if Edward Ferrars, he was educated privately by a tutor. So if he didn't attend Oxford, how could he be, ordained? Or then he ends up going to Oxford?
No, he did go to Oxford. He did. He was educated privately, like instead of going to like Eton or Westminster or one of these.
That's for the lower level of education?
Yeah, that would be like a high school, junior high school.
Okay. But then he does go to Oxford.
He did go to Oxford.
That's right. It does mention that.
He got ordained later on because he needed to have a living offered to him. I mean, not necessarily a living, but he needed to have some kind of clerical job offered to him to get ordained. So that's why he wasn't ordained yet. Yeah. So even if somebody had offered him a curacy, like which is what Mrs. Jennings thought he was going to get, then he could have been ordained based on that. But he had to have some patron who was offering him a job before he could get ordained.
Mm-hmm.
And forgive me if you covered this in your talk, but what did Austen's father think about her characterizations of the various clergymen in her novels? Do we know any like biographical details?
We don't know. All I've been able to find is what I shared with you guys, which was those opinions of Emma, and the fact that her father tried to submit Pride and Prejudice for publication tells us that he liked it. Right? He certainly liked that one. And as far as we understand, her family was very supportive of all of her writing. So I haven't seen any indications that they didn't. Maybe y'all have come across something, but I haven't. So the clergymen are important characters. So.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we, I think we probably need to stop.
We probably do need to wrap up, but thank you, Brenda, and thank you to our audience for being so active in the comments. That was a great Q&A following a really great talk.
Yeah,
and I'm happy to discuss more with y'all. I gave you my email address, which is just BrendaCoxRegency@gmail.com. If you have questions that I can help you with, then email me. I'd be happy to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Brenda. And yes, thank you. This was really fun reading the comments and seeing how invested people are. People have strong opinions about Austen and Pride and Prejudice in particular. Well, we want to invite everybody back on March 3rd for our next presentation. Natasha Duquette will give a talk on the contemplative Eleanor Tilney and consider how Eleanor's contemplative practices are shaped by Austen's reading, which ranges from novelist Anne Radcliffe to philosopher David Hume.
Great. So now Unsung Characters is off and running. And while you wait for the next installment, maybe you could take a look and enjoy our previous programs on our website, which contains an archive of all our previous episodes. So that's over 50 hour-and-a-half events that you can binge on if you like. There are topics ranging from Austen's daily music books, to the work of Regency textile designer Anna Maria Garthwaite, to multicultural adaptations of Jane Austen's novels, to Austen's connections to nature, medicine, gardening, you name it. We've enjoyed bringing you this thought-provoking programming for the past 5.5 years.
Yeah, and for those of you still in the audience, we are so thankful for your support. Please consider donating. We rely on donations. They're so crucial to what we're able to do at Jane Austen and Company to continue to provide high quality programming that is accessible to everyone. So every contribution that you make helps us to put content out there. So when you're registering for events, please donate then. Please scan the QR code to donate as well. And we thank you in advance for all of your continued support. We really, really appreciate it.
In other related news, which something I'm very excited about, the Jane Austen Summer Program has opened registration for our 4-day symposium this June 11th to the 14th. We're in a brand new location this year, Seton Hill University in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, but it will be the same level of fun and same level of value in terms of the quality of the programming. There's going to be a Regency ball. There will be discussion groups, context corners, very excellent plenary speakers, all centered on the theme Pride, Prejudice, and the Pursuit of Happiness. And we're celebrating the 250th of the Declaration of Independence, the signing. So check out our website to learn more and register. Early bird registration is taking place all throughout the month of February.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Until next time.